The courtroom buzzed with whispers, filled with quiet judgment and doubt. Every seat was taken, and the gallery was packed with curious onlookers who thought they were witnessing just another mundane case. To them, it was merely a small-time property dispute between a young woman and a wealthy man. But for Naomi Davis, this was far more personal. Naomi stood tall as she entered the courtroom, her back straight, her chin held high. A young black woman in her late 20s, Naomi wore a modest gray blazer over a crisp white blouse. Her shoes, though polished, bore the faintest signs of wear, a stark contrast to her opponent, Richard Steele, whose perfectly tailored suit practically screamed power and influence. Richard Steele, the smug businessman, leaned casually at his table. His designer suit was impeccable, his posture one of effortless arrogance as he smirked at Naomi across the room. It was as if the air around him screamed that he didn't belong here, and neither did Naomi. Naomi's eyes met his for a brief moment, and a silent challenge passed between them. A challenge that was clear, unspoken. You don't belong here. But Naomi remained composed, her face an impenetrable mask, despite the tension building inside her. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence as Naomi was called to the stand. She rose slowly, her hands tightly gripping the edge of the table, her voice slightly trembling at first. She explained how the property in question had been in her family for generations, and how Richard had used deceitful tactics to take it from her. But as Naomi continued, Judge Samuel Brooks, a gruff man in his 50s with a perpetual frown, interrupted her. "Get to the point, Ms. Davis," he snapped, not bothering to hide his impatience. Naomi faltered for a moment, her confidence shaken, but she quickly regained composure. She fought to keep her voice steady as the murmurs in the room grew louder. "Is there a point to this, Ms. Davis?" Judge Brooks muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the room to hear. A ripple of laughter passed through the courtroom, but Naomi remained silent. Naomi froze, her face flushed with embarrassment, her body trembling slightly, but she didn't let it show. For a brief moment, she felt the weight of their mockery, the sting of their judgment. But then something shifted inside her. Slowly, deliberately, Naomi straightened her back, unclenching her fists, and looked Judge Brooks in the eye. The laughter died, and a heavy silence took its place. "Your Honor," Naomi's voice was firm now, steady and unwavering, "before you dismiss this case, there's something you should see." Naomi reached into her blazer pocket and pulled out a sleek leather holder. With a calm hand, she placed it on the table and flipped it open, revealing the golden emblem of the U.S. Secret Service badge. The room fell into stunned silence as the badge caught the light, glinting like a warning. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Richard Steele's cocky grin evaporated, replaced by a look of pure alarm. His lawyer's mouth fell open, his eyes darting nervously between Naomi and the badge. Even Judge Brooks, who had been so certain of his authority just moments ago, seemed stunned. Naomi didn't smile, nor did she revel in the shock she had caused. She simply stood there, poised and calm, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room. The shift in power was undeniable. "Your Honor," Naomi's voice was even more commanding now, "I'm not just here to argue about this property. This case is part of a much larger investigation, one that has been ongoing for months." She let her words sink in before continuing. The murmurs in the gallery grew louder as Naomi revealed her involvement with the Secret Service. "I've been working undercover for the past 6 months to investigate Mr. Steele and his illegal business practices." Richard Steele stood up suddenly, his face red with fury. "This is outrageous!" he shouted. "She's lying! This is all fabricated!" Naomi didn't flinch. She simply stared at him, her gaze unwavering. "I have evidence," Naomi said coolly, her tone slicing through the tension in the room. She placed a slim file on the table in front of her. "I have documents that directly link Mr. Steele to money laundering, using my family's property as a conduit." The room erupted into chaos as Richard Steele's lawyer leapt to his feet, trying to stop her. "Objection!" he shouted, his voice panicked. Naomi didn't waver. She kept her eyes locked on the judge. "Your Honor," Naomi's voice was calm but commanding, "I've made it clear that this isn't just about me or my family. This is about taking down a criminal enterprise, one that's been operating under all of our noses." Judge Brooks was clearly struggling. He looked from the file Naomi had placed on the table to Richard, who was practically frothing with rage. "What exactly are you implying, Ms. Davis?" Judge Brooks asked, his voice low, tight with concern. Naomi didn't hesitate. "I'm not implying anything," she replied, her tone measured but sharp. "I'm stating facts. And the facts are Mr. Steele is involved in activities that extend beyond just this property." The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence as Naomi's words hung in the air. The tension was palpable, and everyone knew that things were about to take a dramatic turn. The room was tense, everyone watching Naomi closely. Even Richard Steele seemed unsure of himself for the first time. His face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with his tie. Naomi knew the stakes had just risen. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her, but she didn't let it show. She kept her posture straight, her gaze unwavering. Judge Brooks, looking increasingly uncomfortable, finally spoke. "Ms. Davis, you're suggesting that a man of Mr. Steele's standing is involved in criminal activity?" His voice had lost its earlier confidence. "What I'm suggesting, Your Honor, is that the evidence is overwhelming," Naomi responded, her voice still calm but firm. "Mr. Steele has used my family's property to launder millions of dollars through shell companies, and that's just the beginning." The gallery murmured with shock. Naomi could feel the room shift, the balance of power tilting in her favor. Even Richard Steele, who had been so confident just moments before, was now visibly rattled. "I have all the documentation, Your Honor," Naomi said, turning slightly to pull out the thick folder she had brought. "The money transfers, the shell companies, the photographs, everything you need to understand exactly what's been happening." "Enough!" Judge Brooks snapped, his patience clearly wearing thin. He took the folder from Naomi, his hand trembling slightly as he flipped through the pages. The room watched in complete silence, every person on edge. Naomi watched as the judge's face changed with every new piece of evidence he reviewed. His brow furrowed deeper, his lips tightening as he examined the photos, bank records, and documents. The tension in the room was palpable. "This is," Judge Brooks muttered, his voice trailing off. He glanced up at Naomi and then back at the folder, a deep crease forming between his eyebrows. "It's worse than I thought," Naomi said quietly, almost as if to herself. "Mr. Steele has been operating in plain sight for years, using the law to cover up his illegal activities. But now, that's about to end." Richard Steele was losing control. "This is a setup," he yelled, slamming his fist on the table. "You can't let her do this." Naomi didn't even flinch. She remained composed, her posture unshaken. Her calm in the face of his outburst only seemed to deepen the unease in the room. "Mr. Steele," Naomi said with a chilling calmness, "if you have nothing to hide, why are you so afraid?" The courtroom buzzed with whispers. Naomi's words hung heavy in the air. Judge Brooks, clearly at a loss for what to do next, opened his mouth to speak, but hesitated. Finally, with a heavy sigh, he spoke. This court is adjourned until further notice. I will personally review the evidence before issuing a ruling. The courtroom erupted into chaos. Richard Steele jumped from his seat, shouting, "This isn't over! I won't let you ruin me!" Naomi stood there, unfazed by the chaos unfolding around her. As she gathered her things, she calmly turned to Richard. "You should start looking over your shoulder, Mr. Steele. They're coming for you." Naomi stepped out of the courthouse, the weight of the day's events settling on her shoulders. The bright afternoon sun greeted her, but it didn't lift the heaviness in her chest. She knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. Richard Steele might have been powerful, but she was more than ready to take him down. A few reporters rushed to her, but Naomi held up her hand, signaling for them to stop. She had no time for the media circus right now. "I'll speak when I have something real to say," she said, turning to walk away. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a message from her attorney, Lucas Grant. "We need to talk. It's urgent," the message read. Naomi felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just a routine update. This was something big. She quickly dialed Lucas's number and waited as the phone rang. When he answered, his voice was low, tense. "Naomi, it's worse than we thought. Steele's got his hands in deeper waters than we anticipated." "What do you mean?" Naomi asked, her voice steady despite the concern rising in her chest. "He's connected to more than just money laundering. There's a whole network of corruption he's built, and it's spread across several high-profile figures. We're talking about judges, politicians, people with real power." Naomi felt a chill run down her spine. "Are you telling me we're up against a criminal syndicate?" "It's worse," Lucas said grimly. "Steele's untouchable, Naomi. Not just legally. He's got people in all the right places. If we go after him too hard, we might get caught in the crossfire." Naomi's mind raced. She knew she had to make a decision, and it had to be the right one. "Then we make them come for us," she said, her voice firm. "I'm not backing down." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Lucas spoke, his voice filled with reluctant respect. "I knew you'd say that. I'll prepare everything on my end. Be careful, Naomi. This is no longer just about Steele. It's about a system." "I've been careful this whole time," Naomi replied. "But now, I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to destroy them all." As she hung up, Naomi felt a sense of clarity wash over her. The path ahead was treacherous, but she was ready. Richard Steele had made a dangerous enemy, and now he would pay the price. Naomi arrived at her apartment later that evening, her mind still spinning with everything that had happened. She locked the door behind her and sank onto the couch, her eyes staring blankly at the wall. She hadn't expected things to escalate this quickly, but now it was clear. This wasn't just about a corrupt businessman. It was about a web of lies, corruption, and power that ran far deeper than she had ever imagined. Her phone buzzed again, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was Lucas. Naomi answered quickly. "Naomi, they know you're onto them." Lucas's voice was urgent. "I just got word from a source. Steele's people are watching you. They won't hesitate to come after you if you get too close." Naomi's jaw clenched. "Let them come," she said coldly. "I'm not backing down. They've crossed the line, Lucas." "You have to be careful," Lucas warned. "I can't protect you if things go south. You're playing a dangerous game." "I know what I'm doing," Naomi replied, her voice steady. "Steele doesn't know who he's up against. I'm ready for whatever he throws at me." As she ended the call, Naomi stood up and walked to her desk. Her eyes scanned the stack of files in front of her, but one folder caught her eye. It was thick, filled with evidence that could bring down not only Steele, but an entire network of powerful people. She opened it slowly, her fingers brushing over the top sheet. It was a financial record detailing illegal transactions tied to Steele's company, his investments, and the people who were protecting him. Naomi's heart raced as she reviewed the documents. This was the kind of evidence that could change everything. But it was also the kind of evidence that made her a target. She didn't have much time. If she didn't act quickly, Steele would make his move first. Naomi knew she had to keep pushing, even if it meant putting herself in more danger. Naomi closed the folder and grabbed her coat. As she left her apartment, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. She tried not to show that she noticed, but her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't paranoid. She was being watched. She walked with purpose, heading toward her car, keeping her movements casual. But inside, she was alert, every sense on high alert. This was the moment she had been preparing for. As she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, she glanced in the rear-view mirror. The SUV was still there, following her. Naomi's lips curled into a small, confident smile. She wasn't alone anymore. She hit the gas, the car surging forward. Whatever Steele had planned, Naomi was ready to face it. Naomi drove through the night, her eyes scanning the road ahead. The SUV was still tailing her, never too close, but always within sight. She had hoped to lose it, but it was clear that someone was watching her every move. She turned off the highway, taking a series of winding streets to lose the tail. The car followed. Naomi's grip on the steering wheel tightened. If they were after her, she couldn't lead them to her destination. After several more twists and turns, Naomi pulled into a small, quiet parking lot behind a nondescript building. She stopped the car and waited, her breath steady, but her heart racing. She watched through the rearview mirror as the SUV cruised past the entrance. Naomi exhaled in relief, but didn't let her guard down. She had been a step ahead, but she knew this was far from over. Getting out of the car, Naomi made her way into the building, an old run-down warehouse that she had used for meetings before. She had a contact inside who could help her with what came next. Inside, the air was stale, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights was the only sound. Naomi made her way down a narrow hallway to a door marked with a simple A1. She knocked 3 times. A moment later, the door opened. A man in his early 40s, wearing a plain black suit and a badge on his belt, greeted her with a nod. "You made it," he said. "What's the situation?" "It's worse than I thought," Naomi replied, walking into the room. "Steele's people are closing in. They know I'm on to them, but I've got something they don't." She placed the folder she had been carrying onto the table, flipping it open. "This is the evidence that will take Steele down, but we need to act fast before they catch up." The man, who Naomi knew only as Agent Carter, leaned forward, his expression turning serious as he skimmed the documents. His eyes widened slightly. "This is big. We can't afford any mistakes." "I know," Naomi said, her tone resolute. "I'm ready to go all in. But we need a plan." Carter stood up, pacing the room. "We've been tracking Steele's operations for months, but this could change everything. We need to get this to the right people. People who can move fast." Naomi nodded. "I'll make the call. But first, I need to get out of here. Steele's men won't be far behind." She grabbed the folder and headed for the door, her eyes scanning the hallway. Carter followed her, his hand resting lightly on his weapon. "Be careful, Naomi," Carter said softly, as they stepped out into the night. "This is just the beginning." Naomi didn't respond. She didn't need to. She knew what was at stake, and she wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, she was ready to face it. Naomi and Carter quickly made their way to the car, staying in the shadows. The air was thick with tension, and Naomi could hear the distant hum of sirens. They were on a tight timeline, and every second mattered. As they got into the car, Carter turned to Naomi. "Do you have the contact?" he asked, his voice low. Naomi nodded, her eyes focused on the road ahead. "I've got it," Naomi replied, "but it's not going to be easy to get to them. Steele has eyes everywhere. We have to be careful." Carter's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "What's the plan?" Naomi hesitated for a moment before answering. "I'll call in the contact, but we need to meet them in a secure location. Somewhere Steele won't think to look." "Got it," Carter said. He started the engine and pulled out of the lot, taking a few sharp turns as they headed for a more remote part of the city. As they drove, Naomi glanced at her phone. She had to make the call now. She dialed the number, her finger hovering over the screen. Her heart was racing, but she knew she couldn't hesitate. The phone rang twice before it was picked up. "Naomi?" a familiar voice answered. "I didn't think I'd hear from you again." "It's urgent," Naomi replied. "We have a situation. Steele is on to me. I need to meet you now." "Where?" The voice was steady, though Naomi could hear the tension underneath. "I'll text you the address," Naomi said, quickly typing out the details. "And don't be followed. Steele's men are everywhere." There was a pause before the voice on the other end responded. "Got it. I'll be there. Just stay safe." Naomi ended the call and looked at Carter. "We're almost there," she said, her voice calm but determined. "I need you to stay alert. This is the most dangerous part." Carter nodded. "I'm with you. Just tell me where to go." They arrived at an old industrial building, the kind of place Steele would never expect. Naomi felt a wave of relief. It was the perfect spot for a clandestine meeting. "Wait here," Naomi said to Carter. "I'll go alone." "No," Carter replied immediately. "I'm coming with you. You're not alone in this." Naomi hesitated, but then nodded. She knew he had a point. They were in this together. The two of them made their way into the building, the air thick with tension. Every step could be a trap, but Naomi couldn't afford to back down now. Inside, they were met by a figure in the shadows. Naomi didn't flinch. This was it, the moment that would change everything. Naomi stepped forward, her eyes scanning the darkened room. The figure in the shadows remained still, his face obscured by a hood. But Naomi could tell this was the contact she had been waiting for. "You're late," the figure said, his voice cold and clipped. Naomi didn't flinch. "I had to make sure I wasn't followed," she replied, her tone firm. "I've got what you asked for." The figure stepped out of the shadows, revealing a tall man with a chiseled jawline and piercing blue eyes. He took a step closer, inspecting Naomi carefully. "I can see you came prepared," he said, his gaze now resting on the folder she was holding tightly. Naomi didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her bag, pulling out the folder and sliding it across the table toward him. The man took the folder, flipping it open with a quick motion. He scanned the documents inside with a practiced eye, his expression unreadable. After a long pause, he looked up at Naomi. "This is it. Steele won't be happy." "He won't be happy about anything," Naomi replied, her voice laced with a hint of bitterness. "But it's time we put an end to this." The man nodded slowly, closing the folder and standing up. "All right, we need to move fast. Steele has already been making his moves, and he'll be coming after you soon." "I know," Naomi said, her gaze hardening. "But I'm not backing down." Carter, who had been waiting quietly in the corner, finally spoke up. "What's the plan?" The man turned to face Carter, sizing him up for a moment. "You're not the one Steele's after, but you're in this now. You'll have to stay sharp." "I can handle it," Carter replied, his voice confident. The man gave a slight nod. Good. Now, we need to get moving. There's a safe house nearby where you can lay low for a while. It's secure. From there, we can figure out the next steps. Naomi nodded and turned to Carter. Let's go. They moved quickly, slipping out of the building and into the night. Naomi kept her eyes peeled, every sense on high alert. She knew Steele wouldn't let up easily. As they approached the safe house, Naomi's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and saw a message from an unknown number. He's coming for you. Naomi's heart skipped a beat. Steele wasn't wasting any time. She turned to Carter. We need to hurry. Carter nodded, his jaw clenched. Stay close. We're almost there. The safe house loomed ahead, a nondescript building that could easily be overlooked. But for now, it was their only sanctuary. They reached the door, and Naomi quickly unlocked it, stepping inside. Carter followed closely behind. Inside, the man was already waiting. He motioned for them to sit down. We don't have much time, he said, his tone grim. Steele knows we're here. Naomi sat down, her mind racing. She had to come up with a plan. The next few hours could change everything,